The Legend of King Arthur. The days after Rome's shadow had receded from Britain were days of perpetual dusk, an age of fractured kingdoms and uncertain dawns. The land, once held together by imperial order, now lay scattered like shards of broken glass, each glittering fragment ruled by ambitious chieftains and petty kings who sharpened both their swords and their schemes. Out of this unstable morass there rose a single name, greater than any other, a name whispered in fear and awe across smoky halls and blood-soaked fields, Uther Pendragon. Uther's rise was written in fire and steel, his golden dragon banners unfurled above blackened ruins, trailing triumph and dread in their wake. Wherever he rode, clad in armour that caught the red sun, eyes burning with the promise of conquest, villages bowed or burned, and the pleas for mercy were as futile as prayers for a gentle winter. He forged a peace, perhaps, but it was a brittle accord, one measured in years of bloodshed rather than trust. Britons lived not in hope, but in apprehension, glancing over their shoulders for the king's wrath. His court at Winchester was a nest of viperish intrigue. Barons jostled for favour, weaving webs with words as honeyed as spring and eyes as cold as frost. Uther walked among them a restless spirit. His victories tasted of iron, not of joy, and an emptiness like a hollow crown pressed heavy on his soul. It was in the whispering corridors of this uneasy kingdom that Uther first beheld Igraine, Duchess of Cornwall, a woman whose presence stilled even the most blustering courtier. Her beauty struck him as sharply as a blade between the ribs. It was not simply her radiant grace, nor the lithe poise with which she bore herself, but the strength he glimpsed in her quiet bearing and gentle voice. She haunted his thoughts like a memory of lost peace. Her heart, however, belonged to Gorlois, her husband, a man bound by honour and loyalty, virtues that to Uther seemed almost alien.
My lady, I would have you and your husband make this court your home. Your presence brings light to my hall.
My home is in Cornwall, Lord King, beside my husband. Duty and honour call me there.
Honour is mine to bestow, my lady. What if I commanded you to stay?
Even kings cannot command the heart, my lord. Love and loyalty are not given by decree.
We shall see.
Obsession rooted in the king's heart, blooming in darkness. At first he courted her with words, but as rejection stung, his approach soured. Gentle petitions turned to harsh demands. Gorlois, keen and wary, saw the gathering storm. He spirited Igraine away to Tintagel, a fortress carved from the bones of the sea, its cliffs gripped by ancient enchantments. There, amid salt spray and wind, he hoped to shelter her from the king's consuming hunger. Yet defiance bred only rage. Uther's armies battered Cornwall not for glory nor justice, but to sate a lust cloaked in the thinnest garments of war. Still, even Uther sensed that force could never win Igraine's heart. In desperation, he sought Merlin, the druid whose wisdom was as deep as time, whose eyes saw the tangled threads of fate. There, in Merlin's dim-lit chamber beneath the flicker of rune-marked candles, Uther bared the longing that fevered his nights.
Grant me what I desire. Let me possess her.
He begged, promising anything, treasure, loyalty, a future unpromised. Merlin, whose sight pierced to the heart of destiny, saw the shivering outline of a child, born not just of longing or deception, but of prophecy. He agreed, but warned Uther.
A price must be paid. I shall weave you a glamour. For one night you shall wear Gorlois' form. But the child conceived, he belongs to me. He will be taken from the court, hidden from your legacy, and raised far from your influence."
Desire blinding reason, Uther accepted his terms. That night, as Gorlois fell on a distant battlefield, cut down by the world's remorseless turn, Uther, cloaked in Merlin's magic, walked unchallenged into Tintagel. Igraine, believing her beloved home safe, welcomed her husband back into her arms, her heart unaware of the king's deceit. In the hush of that enchanted night, Arthur was conceived, a child whose destiny was churned in the tides of war, secrecy, and foretelling. When the truth unfurled, when Igraine learned of her husband's death and the betrayal woven into the king's conquest, grief broke over her like a tempest. Yet her sorrow, fierce as it was, could not touch the innocence growing within her. In time, Merlin came to claim the boy, as promised. With a last soothing word and a shimmer of magic, he spirited the infant away into morning's mist, and left him in the care of Sir Ector, a good and honest knight, whose only knowledge of Arthur was that he was a mysterious foundling to be raised beside his own son Kay. As Arthur began his quiet childhood far from courtly poison, Uther's crown grew heavier. His victories, once sweet, turned hollow. His foes encircled him, and guilt's shadow chilled his heart. Illness and despair took what age would not, and so, after years contested and haunted, Uther's reign ended not as a legend, but as a warning. The realm fractured once more. The throne, cold, empty, waiting, bore silent witness for the boy who would rise, not to rule in iron and fear, but to heal with justice and hope. The king born in secret, prophesied to unite a divided land. Long before Arthur lifted a sword or wore a crown, Merlin the Enchanter travelled the quiet paths of Britain, a man both respected and feared by those who knew of him. His origins were uncertain. Some whispered he was born to a mortal woman and a spirit of the air, half human, half something else, touched by both madness and power. Others claimed he was beyond time, able to age as he willed and bound to secrets no one else should hold. Despite the stories, Merlin worked quietly, moving through the wild places where ancient druids had once held their rites, and old gods lay forgotten beneath mist-covered hills. Merlin had seen what the future might bring. He knew that King Uther's reckless desires would plunge the land into suffering and discord. But among those dark possibilities, one light shone clearly, a child destined to heal the kingdom.
Without a rightful king, Britain will fall again into ruin.
From the moment Arthur was born, Merlin stood close yet unseen, guarding and guiding with careful hands. When Arthur was still an infant, Merlin brought him to Sir Ector.
Care for this boy as if he were your own, and never tell him of his true birth. His path must be protected.
As Arthur grew at Sir Ector's side, strong and kind but unaware of his royal blood, Merlin moved through courts and councils, walking among kings and troublemakers alike. He spoke little, but his words shaped the decisions of lords and barons. Yet he revealed no names, only hints and promises. During these years the realm fractured into petty wars. Nobles fought over power with no clear leader to unite them. Merlin watched the chaos unfold, waiting for the right moment to act. Then he created a plan, the sword in the stone. This was no ordinary weapon. It carried magic forged from fire and starlight, bearing an ancient enchantment. Inscribed on the stone were the words,
"Whoso pulleth out this sword from this stone and anvil is rightwise king born of all England.
As nobles and knights gathered before the stone, each tried with great effort but failed to lift the blade. Some scorned the test, others despaired. Merlin observed silently. In those quiet moments, Merlin held countless possibilities in his mind. Some visions showed Arthur ruling with honour and strength. Others revealed betrayal and sorrow stained across the land. Yet all these possibilities began with a single choice. The day when Arthur, humble and untested, would step forward not as a noble prince but as a mere squire. With that one act, everything would change. The clangour of morning bells rolled over the city like a summons to destiny. Beneath their peal, a tangle of nobles and commoners pressed around the churchyard, all eyes drawn to a single marvel. An ancient sword thrust upright into a block of weathered stone, its inscription catching the light. Men in bright cloaks and shining mail stepped forward one by one, summoned by ambition, pride, or perhaps some quiet hope. Each made a show of confidence, muscles straining, brows furrowed, as their gauntleted hands closed over the jewelled hilt. The sword was indifferent to their efforts. It would not budge for dukes bristling with titles, nor for seasoned knights still bearing scars of distant crusades. Finally, with grumbling and sidelong glances thick as fog, the crowd's bravest found their strength had melted into humiliation. The sword remained, unmoved, glinting cold laughter in the frost-bitten air. From the fringe of this spectacle, Arthur moved unremarkably, a boy in borrowed armour, tasked with serving his foster brother's whims. Kay, all fire and impatience, had forgotten his sword and barked orders for Arthur to fetch it, as if merely retrieving a wayward dog. Arthur did as he always did, quietly. He slipped through the city's alleys, mind on simple errands, but when he reached the stables his heart sank. Kay's blade was gone. Glancing back at the churchyard, he remembered the sword in the stone, so recently scorned by the great and the mighty. He hesitated, then let his feet carry him back. In that moment the churchyard was deserted but for the sword and the sharp silence that lingered after so much failed bluster. The blade jutted skyward, haloed in a circle of pale light, profound as anything Arthur had ever seen. He stepped forward, almost reverently, as if the air had thinned around him, and he must tread gently or be found wanting. Arthur placed both hands on the grip, feeling the leather worn smooth by time and legend. For a heartbeat, memory flickered. Lessons in courtesy, nights by the hearth, Merlin's eyes, patient and knowing, fixed upon him like a quiet challenge. He drew in a breath. The sword slid free as if tugged by the wind. No shout, no miracle, only the sudden enormity of it, the weight of new possibility humming in the cold morning light. He returned to Kay, heart thumping, sword in hand, its presence strange, almost secret, as if it belonged to another world. Kay took the sword from Arthur, then stared, lips parted, recognizing instantly what he now held.
Father, look what Arthur has done.
Sir Ector's face changed. Awe chased the shadows across his brow. He spoke softly, as if the world's axis had shifted.
Where did you get this sword, Arthur?
From the stone in the churchyard, sir.
Without another word, Ector beckoned them both through the crowd, which now surged in their wake, suspicion and longing writ upon every face. At Ector's urging, Arthur replaced the sword in its stony cradle. The congregation watched, breathless, knight and beggar alike.
Try again.
Arthur, hands trembling slightly, wrapped his fingers around the hilt. This time a ripple passed through the assembly as the blade sang free, clear and bright. A hush deepened, profound and expectant. Then, as if guided by one invisible hand, the proudest lords and humblest servants sank to their knees. The ground was cold, but beneath the weight of revelation, hearts burned. Arthur looked around, bewildered, seeing not only men kneeling, but the hope of a battered kingdom bending itself toward him. Ector knelt too, and his aged voice trembled.
You are our rightful king.
So, in that pale morning light, as larks wove new songs through the quiet, Arthur stood amidst those who had doubted and those who had dreamed, the sword gleaming in his grasp. What had once seemed impossible had slipped, silent, into his keeping, a kingdom's destiny, a boy's uncertain heart, drawn at last from stone. The weeks unfurled in frost-tinged mornings and nights heavy with whispered conspiracies. Arthur, newly crowned yet not yet believed, felt the weight of every gaze that lingered too long, every murmur stifled when he stepped into the candlelit corridors of the great hall. His hand still remembered the cool assurance of the sword's hilt, but his heart reeled, uncertain beneath the bright new burden of kingship. The old nobles gathered in knots, their cloaks thick as their pride. They muttered of tradition and blood, of vanished royal lines and ancient rights.
Uther's true son is he, a bastard, a boy, a trick of Merlin. Why should we kneel to a child when grown men walk among us?
Arthur stood at the heart of this storm, solitary as the sword had been in its stone. He waited for counsel, and found it in the cool dusk when Merlin entered, staff tapping rhythm on the cold flagstones, eyes glinting with that peculiar mix of mischief and melancholy.
Power is a strange cloak, too heavy for the proud and too bright for the timid. It wants a heart that listens.
And what if they will not hear me? They see only my youth, my blood. They see me as nothing.
Then let them see your deeds. Strength untested is no strength at all. You must answer challenge with justice, suspicion with mercy. You must step into their quarrels and mend what they cannot.
Day after day the challenge was thrown at Arthur's feet, a border lord refusing fealty, a knight who would not yield the keys of his keep, an earl who barricaded his people behind stone walls. Arthur mounted his horse, Excalibur at his side, and rode out, Merlin close as his shadow. He spoke to the people, promising protection not because of his birth, but because of what he would do with it. He met the lords on their own fields, not always with steel, but often with outstretched hand. He saw disputes ended with fair judgment, let mercy temper law. When one hot-headed baron challenged his right by force of arms, Arthur met him in single combat, his blade quick but his terms kinder than most. The baron yielded, his pride broken not by defeat, but by the dignity with which Arthur treated him. Bit by bit the realm softened. The castle doors swung open to him, then the city gates. Men remembered Uther's strength now in the plain wisdom of the sun. The people began to cheer in the markets, the old women blessing his passage. Even the sullen lords one by one bent the knee, some reluctantly, some with a dawning hope. Merlin stood by, his presence a quiet benediction as Arthur's reign took root.
You have drawn more than a sword from stone, lad. You have drawn the hearts of men from suspicion. That, too, is kingship.
The realm, once fractured and restless as a winter sea, grew steady beneath the hand of the boy who became their king. And so, through the guidance of a wizard and the dawning courage in his own breast, Arthur united what war and arrogance had divided and set the cornerstone of a legend. The kingdom's peace, such as it had grown, was soon tested by the fire and fury that forever trails after crowns. Word came of a rebellion, swift-winged as crows. A confederacy of restless kings from distant shires had joined arms, resolved to expel the upstart son of Uther. Arthur answered with the certainty that grows in young men who have not yet learned to fear defeat. He donned the armour still new to his shoulders and gathered the faithful, knights of eager heart, few in number but fierce in loyalty. The fields near Bedtime ran rich with morning mist when Arthur met his foes. The battle unfurled in thunder and cries, iron upon iron, arrows slicing the low fog, the world brimming with the noise and terror of men testing their fate. Among the chaos, Arthur rode at the fore, a slender figure ablaze with a kind of radiant purpose. He showed not only the nerve to command, but the knack for saving lives, calling a halt when mercy could be shown, rallying the broken where hope had faltered. He fought not as a king reluctant to spill his own blood, nor as a brute drunk on conquest, but as one whose right to rule was earned with sweat and steel. It was there, with the dawn breaking bloody over the slain, that Arthur broke the back of rebellion and stitched his crown more tightly to his brow. Yet victory came at a steep and unforeseen cost. In the melee's darkest hour, as enemy chieftains pressed in and the battle's tide wavered dangerously, Arthur's faithful sword, his companion since boyhood and symbol of his hard-won authority, met its match against the iron of a rebel warlord. With a teeth-jarring crack, the blade shivered in his hand and splintered, its pieces spinning down into the blood and mud at his feet. For a brief, hollow moment the world seemed to hush, as if breathless at the breaking of a king's cherished totem. Though he pressed on, rallying his men with unarmed courage, Arthur felt a shadow pass through him, a chill sense of loss that no victory could fully dispel. The clangor of arms faded, and in the battered hush that followed the field's cleansing, the king nursed his sorrow like a wound that bled within. Restlessness dogged Arthur's steps in the days that followed. It is hard, even for the newly crowned, not to mourn a symbol so intimately entwined with one's sense of self. He wandered the fringes of his newly won realm, seeking solace where he could, beneath the tangled branches of old oaks, among the fresh graves of the fallen, and finally at the bank of a still and silent lake, cloaked in the hush of twilight. The air hung heavy there, thick with the perfume of water lilies and the watchful eyes of unseen spirits. Even the birds seemed to know that songs would be out of place. He stood motionless, lost in thoughts that offered neither comfort nor release, when Merlin found him. The wizard's robes drew the purpling sky behind them like banners, and his staff left deep impressions in the soft earth at Arthur's side. Merlin said nothing of swords or thrones at first, only sat beside the young king, the hours flowing past as dusk settled into night. When at last he spoke, his voice was barely more than the shift of a reed in the evening wind.
Not all that is lost is ended. For those who mourn with open hearts, certain gifts remain, waiting at the world's secret places.
As if summoned by this utterance, the surface of the lake began to change. Subtle at first, a shivering patch among calm waters, then growing into a ripple that widened until reaching the far reeds. From beneath that silvery film an arm emerged, pale and adorned in shining samite, rising surely into the dying light. Draped in water and mystery, the Lady of the Lake herself surfaced, her hair streaming about her like dark banners, her eyes fathomless and strange. Cradled in her upturned hand was a new sword, unlike any forged by mortal hands. Its blade shimmered with the blue-white fire of stars caught on steel. Its hilt blazed with jewels that glimmered fierce as hope long denied. Arthur felt himself drawn forward, compelled by awe as much as by gratitude. He strode knee-deep into the lake's cool embrace, his heart thundering in his ears. The lady regarded him, her gaze neither soft nor severe, but ageless and searching, as if weighing the deeds of his soul. When she extended the sword, its balance perfect even above the water, he accepted it with a reverence born of sorrow and wonder. The blade thrummed in his grasp, a songless promise, heavy with fate and shining with new beginnings. Merlin watched from the shore, the half-light weaving silver into his beard. He spoke, his words floating over the water to Arthur's eager, uncertain ears.
Excalibur, remember my king, this is not only a sword, but a symbol shaped in the crucible of trial and mercy. Its edge is keen not only for war, but for justice. Wield it wisely, and let no shadow claim the heart that bears it.
Thus, so armed and anointed by the mythic grace of the land itself, Arthur turned from the lake and returned to his weary people. Now, in his hand, Excalibur flashed with something more than mere metal, a promise, a warning, the hope of a realm not just conquered, but healed by the man worthy to lead it. Beneath a sky softly brushed with dawn, the vast plains of Britain stretched wide and restless, as if leaning forward to embrace a new age. Arthur stood on a gentle rise overlooking the birthplace of what was to become his greatest endeavour, the city of Camelot. The land here whispered with promise, a fresh canvas upon which he might paint not merely a kingdom of stone and law, but a living heart that would pulse with justice, honour, and unity. It was Merlin who had first spoken of this sacred vision, his voice as steady and sure as the earth beneath their feet.
You shall build a fortress not just to defend against foes, but to anchor peace. A place where all who serve the realm might come as equals, bound not by blood or title, but by the strength of their vows.
The task before Arthur was as colossal as the walls that would rise around him. He summoned masons whose hands bore the wisdom of centuries, carpenters who had shaped forests into homes, and smiths who coaxed fire into the gleam of sword and armour. Day after day stone was laid and timber raised, tower and battlement ascended in rhythms like the measured beat of a great heart. Camelot took shape not as a mere castle, but as a monument to a new world, one forged not from conquest, but from the hope resting in every man's pledge to the other. Yet a kingdom is much more than bricks and mortar. Arthur knew that the true strength of his land must be found around a table, where decisions would be made, justice meted, and loyalty sworn. But what kind of table would this be? A throne, high and ornate, would only mirror the pride and divisions that had long scarred the realm. It was Merlin again who offered the notion that would forever change the course of Arthur's reign. A round table where no seat carried precedence, where all knights who served might share in council as equals, In the echoing hall of the half-finished castle, the magnificent round table was unveiled, its wood polished smooth, the perfect circle symbolizing unbroken fellowship. Word spread like wildfire through the land, and knights came from far and near, not for the lure of gold or glory, but drawn by the magnetism of a new ideal. Lancelot arrived, his steely gaze cloaked in quiet sorrow, bearing the weight of unseen battles. Gawain, whose honesty sparkled like polished amber in the firelight, claimed his place. The youthful Percival, bright-eyed and brimming with wonder, sought purpose beyond the edge of the known world. Others followed, brave souls bearing scars of countless trials, each chosen not for birthright but for courage, honour, and the yearning to serve something larger than themselves. From the moment these knights took their seats, an alchemy began to weave through Camelot's walls. Debates flowed as freely as the wine in their goblets. Laughter mingled with solemn oaths. They spoke of justice, mercy, and the protection of the weak. Their voices carried the weight of sincerity, a chorus united by a bond forged not in subservience, but in mutual respect. Arthur sat among them, not as a distant monarch upon a gilded throne, but as one of their number, a leader who listened deeply, whose judgments were tempered with wisdom and compassion. In his presence, pride softened, rivalries cooled, and a brotherhood blossomed strong enough to stitch together the frayed edges of a fractured land. Outside the castle walls, the people who had once cowered beneath endless wars began to dare hope. Farmers, merchants, and villagers whispered Arthur's name with reverence, seeing in his court the promise of a peace that reached beyond shelter and sword. Camelot became more than a fortress. It became a beacon, a place where law was not an iron rod but a steady hand, and where the valour of a knight was measured as much by the kindness he showed as by the enemies he struck down. Merlin watched quietly from the shadows, a faint smile playing beneath his grey beard. The firelight flickered over the faces of those gathered at the round table, and in that circle he saw the glowing seed of legend taking root. For Arthur had done more than unite a realm. He had breathed life into a dream, a fellowship forged in equality, justice, and courage that would echo through the ages. And it was in this sacred bond, around that perfect roundness of wood and purpose, that the true strength of Camelot was born. The golden light of Camelot shimmered like a promise made manifest, casting long shadows that flickered against the soaring walls and tapestries heavy with history. Those early days of Arthur's reign spoke of hope renewed, a kingdom united under the banner of justice and peace. Yet beneath that radiant surface subtle fissures were beginning to form, quiet but inexorable, like threads pulling loose in a finely woven tapestry. Arthur, ever the tactful and resolute king, understood that the strength of a realm rested not only on the courage of its warriors or the stones of its castles, but also on the bonds forged through marriage and alliance. Thus, when news reached him of Guinevere, the radiant daughter of King Leodegrance, his heart stirred with anticipation. Stories told of her grace, a queen whose wisdom was matched only by the kindness that softened her gaze. Many spoke of her with reverence, calling her a jewel worthy of his crown. When at last Arthur met Guinevere, he found her presence as luminous as the dawn itself, a light that promised to fill the darkest halls with warmth. Their wedding was a marvel of joy and celebration, a festival that wove together all corners of the kingdom. Bells rang out like pealing laughter. Multitudes thronged the streets, their voices rising in song beneath fluttering pennants. Guinevere's smile that day was like a harp's delicate string, vulnerable and haunting, carrying a melody that would haunt Camelot in years to come. Yet, even amid the splendour, Merlin's prophetic voice whispered warnings as a shadow trailing the sun. "The Queen's love will be both boon and bane," he said quietly. His eyes clouded as he studied the stars above.
"The Queen's love will be both boon and bane."
Into this newfound joy came Lancelot du Lac, an outsider in name, yet soon beloved as if born to Camelot's stones. He arrived astride a silver mare, armour glinting like dawn on the lake, his eyes shadowed by histories unspoken. His feats in tourney and quest astounded even the seasoned knights. His loyalty to Arthur was as fierce as fire. Soon he was Arthur's closest companion, the defender of crown and cause, the soul of all that was chivalrous and true. But the human heart, even in Camelot, is a wild and fallible thing. For all Lancelot's strength and discipline, he and Guinevere found themselves drawn together, at first in innocence and admiration, then by something deeper, more dangerous, longings hardly spoken aloud but plain in a glance, in the catch of breath between words. They strove to resist, for duty outweighed desire, and both cherished Arthur beyond themselves. Yet, within Camelot's walls, a silent current flowed stronger each season. Love grew, shadowed by shame, as if the castle itself conspired to remind them that perfection is fragile, that even legends are human. Whispers rose along the shadowed corridors, winding through service rooms and courtier gatherings. Some knights watched with uneasy eyes, torn between loyalty and suspicion. Yet Arthur, ever trusting, denied the rumours, his faith in both Guinevere and Lancelot as steady as the stone beneath his throne. So blossomed a triangle of love and loyalty, brittle in their balance. Arthur, ever the king and peacemaker, did not see the full shape of the sorrow blooming beneath his reign. Lancelot fought for honour in every battle. Guinevere performed her duties as queen with measured grace. Still, a tension wove itself through the fellowship, a quiet fault line beneath the splendour of the Round Table itself. It was in these days, the kingdom at peace, and its heart quietly breaking, that Camelot stood closest to paradise, and also, unknowingly, on the edge of ruin. For in the love and betrayal of its queen and greatest knight, fate planted the bitter seed from which its downfall would one day spring. The seasons wheeled forward, their rhythms observed with new reverence in Camelot, a city wholly transformed by Arthur's ambition and by the rigorous fellowship of his knights. Each morning the sun rose over towers wreathed in golden mist, calling forth a steady parade of banners along the great causeways. But where glory rested easiest was at the Round Table, whose unity soon sent its members riding forth, not to extend power alone, but to encounter the world's dangers and let their courage become the scaffolding of legend. Soon after the realm had settled into this golden age, word arrived of horrors stalking the northern hills. Gawain, ever bold, was the first to answer the call. He rode out beneath the sky weighted with thunder, accompanied only by a handful of new squires and his close friend Sir Gareth. The villagers spoke in terrified tones of the green giant of the Tarn, an ancient being towering and wild, who demanded cruel tribute of cattle and children. In a glen thick with fog, the two brothers confronted the beast. Gawaine's sword ringing against the giant's club, Gareth harrowing its flanks. The monster's strength nearly broke them, until Gawaine, battered and bleeding, recalled a tale of chivalry told by Arthur himself, that no conqueror is greater than the one who spares his foe. Gawaine offered the creature peace, promising safe passage and sanctuary in Camelot's forests if it would cease its terror. To everyone's astonishment, the giant knelt and became a steward of Arthur's wild lands, a living symbol of mercy's might. Not all battles were won through gentleness. Lancelot, riding to the marshlands of the east, found a village beset each night by a serpent enormous beyond belief. Its eyes, the size of shields, glowed dully in rain and moonlight. The creature would rise from the mire at dusk, scales glimmering as it devoured sheep and men alike. For 3 nights Lancelot waited at the border, baiting the beast with torch and song until it surfaced, undulating with murderous intent. Their duel was furious, armour shredded by fangs, Excalibur's twin flashing in Lancelot's grip. He struck at the heart, but the serpent's hide was thick as iron. Using a trick Merlin had once murmured over chess, Lancelot feinted and lured the monster onto a bed of spikes he'd hidden in the reeds. With cunning and valour he felled the beast, whose defeat brought both peace and awe to the trembling villagers. Meanwhile, Percival's adventure led him to the mountains veiled in perpetual twilight. There he found a glen of standing stones, the earth gaunt and frozen by an enchantress who craved beauty above all else. The valley's people had been imprisoned in timeless torment, forced to labour without rest or sleep. Percival confronted the enchantress in her crystal tower, refusing both her lures and threats. He faced her illusions and riddles, the imagined terrors of his childhood, ghosts of shame and doubt come to life. Only by answering her last riddle with humility, admitting his own fears as a knight, did he break her power. As the spell faded, sunlight pierced the gloom, freeing the valley from its unnatural grip. Percival returned, wiser and changed, aware that some victories are won only when one's greatest foe is oneself. Other knights found trials of their own. Tristan harried pirates along the wind-lashed western coast, leading a ragged band outnumbered at every turn. His battle in the cove at Duncrevan became the stuff of legend. Tristan leaping from burning wreck to burning wreck, half his men wounded, yet refusing surrender. With a rallying cry that echoed above the storm, he outflanked the pirates, turning what seemed certain defeat into stunning victory and driving the invaders from Britannia's shores. These quests wove themselves into the life of Camelot. Each night returned marked by wounds or wisdom, a scar, a tale, a lesson. In evenings by the hearth, they recounted their adventures in voices pitched low with humility or high with laughter. For every monstrous foe overcome or wayward soul redeemed, the Round Table grew stronger, its bonds annealed not just by legend, but by deep understanding of what heroism truly cost. Arthur, listening always, gleaned the shape of his kingdom from these stories, knowing peace was not a static thing, but hard won anew by every act of courage and grace. It was this cycle of adventure, return and reflection that made Camelot more than a court. It became an ideal, alive and shining, in every tale sung beneath its banners and every heart transformed by a knight's struggle in the wild. The glory and peril of Camelot's golden age sowed seeds for a quest both grander and more mysterious than any before, one that would mark the last and loftiest aim of Arthur's Round Table. It began with the Shadow, subtle at first, strange omens in the skies, a withering of crops, and a subtle weariness that settled on the spirit of the people. Arthur, troubled by these signs, called together his knights, and it was then that Merlin spoke of a sacred relic, the Holy Grail, a chalice from the time of Christ, lost to the world but prophesied to heal the land and soul of Britain, if found by one pure of heart. At first there was silence as the news settled in the hall. Then Galahad, fresh-faced and unsullied as dew, stepped forward, his eyes bright with answering light. Others followed, Percival with his searching soul, Bors with his steady heart, Lancelot pressed by longing and regret. They swore an oath, hands on the moon-polished table, that none would rest until the Grail's secret was revealed and brought home to heal the realm. The Grail quest did not lead down bright straight roads, nor reward simple might. The knights departed Camelot singly, or in small bands, soon lost to the old forests and dream-stitched wilds that waited beyond the kingdom's edge. Each faced trials that unravelled the worst and best within them. For some, the path ran through haunted chapels and abandoned abbeys, where holy visions appeared in moonlit glass or voices murmured from the crypt's deep dark. Others wandered in circles beset by doubts, temptations, and the weight of their own unspoken sins. Percival's journey bent like a river following its own logic, carrying him to a lonely hermit deep in the greenwood. There, starved and near madness, he learned the asking of the right question. Whom does the Grail serve? Was of even greater consequence than strength of arm. Gawain met enchantresses who spun gold from longing, only to find all treasures hollow unless won by self-mastery. For Lancelot the path grew roughest, his soul consoled and harrowed by visions of perfection always painfully out of reach. His longing for the Grail matched only by his guilt, his unworthiness a wound deeper than any blade could carve. Galahad's quest led him and his closest companions, Sir Bors and Sir Percival, across lands both familiar and enchanted, until at last they reached the mystical castle of Corbenic, the realm of King Pelles, the Fisher King. The castle, ringed by secret rivers and veiled in saintly silence, stood at the edge of the world's last wildness, known only to a few initiates and pilgrims of the holiest mysteries. It was here, within Corbenic's shadowed halls, that Galahad was brought at last, guided by priests and elders through stone corridors haunted by prayers and lamplight. His grandfather and uncle led him through doorways embroidered with ancient symbols, deeper and deeper, until they approached a chamber kept apart from all others, a sanctuary where only the most pure might hope to enter. In this room, cloaked in perfumed incense and perpetual dusk, the Holy Grail itself awaited, a vessel glowing faintly with a light neither silver nor gold, balancing upon an altar of stone as if illumined from within by divine grace. Galahad beheld the prophecy fulfilled. For a brief moment the veil between worlds thinned. He saw, not with his eyes alone, but with the fullness of spirit, what no mortal had glimpsed unshattered. Angels moved like music at the altar's edge. The air itself became a living psalm. Galahad advanced, trembling in their presence of the cup that was both mercy and mystery, and knelt. In that ineffable vision, he was granted understanding beyond words. The Grail seemed to fill him with light and peace, and all earthly longing fell away. After this vision, Galahad was tasked to bring the Grail to the sacred island of Sarras, but he asked instead for a single boon, that he might leave the world after so much grace. As he prayed, the spirit of Joseph of Arimathea appeared, and angels descended. Before Bors and Percival, Galahad was lifted from Cobennic in rapture, his quest ended, not in pride or possession, but in beatitude, leaving behind the still shining promise of all he had sought. Meanwhile, the Round Table itself felt each absence as a wound. Fewer voices at feast, long shadows where young knights had once laughed. When the questers returned, many broken, most changed, they brought not the Grail, but stories both harrowing and wondrous, of miracles glimpsed in the gloom, of kindness exchanged in the direst hunger, of the cost of seeking what cannot be held. Some, like Bors and Percival, came home with a deepened wisdom, others with haunted silences that never quite left their eyes. Arthur received them with honour and sorrow mingled, knowing his kingdom had been both tested and irrevocably altered. Merlin, older now, murmured at his side,
"No king commands the Grail. You must content yourself with the lesson left behind, that faith and the seeking of goodness are victories in themselves, even when no crown or relic rewards them."
The Grail quest, though it knit legends onto the soul of the land, also fractured the unity of the table that had weathered so many storms. Knights left on paths that led away from the old fellowship. A longing, unnamed and unhealed, settled upon Camelot. The city shone on, banners billowing in the clean air, but the age of simple answers was gone. In its place stood a deeper, quieter wisdom, of limits faced, of loss endured, of hope grasped not in conquest but in grace. The court of Camelot, once vibrant with the golden glow of fellowship and peace, began to darken under a shadow neither blade nor siege could fully pierce. Arthur's absence, though brief in the measure of days, whispered opportunity to those who hungered for power, and to the fractures exposed by courtly secrets, long buried beneath courtesy and silence. At the heart of this gathering storm stood Mordred, Arthur's blood, yet a sun too long casted the cold twilight of suspicion and bitterness. Some whispered that his birth was shrouded in secrecy and shadow, others that the boy had been nurtured on dreams of vengeance rather than loyalty. What was certain was that Mordred's ambition burned hotter than any fire kindled by the forge of Camelot's ideals. He watched with a predator's patience, waiting for the moment to seize the reins of a kingdom he believed owed him its crown. The scandal, long buried beneath smiles and silken veils, now unfurled like a poison in the court's veins. The whispered affair between Lancelot and Queen Guinevere, once denied with the desperate faith of those who love, was laid bare by jealous tongues and wary eyes. The harmony so carefully wove by Arthur's hand began to unravel. Factions rose like dark tides, and the knights found themselves divided, their oaths strained by grief and betrayal. With ruthless cunning, Mordred stepped forward in the king's absence. He claimed the throne, invoking law and lineage, twisting truths to shatter the loyalty of even the stoutest of hearts. His calls for order were backed by swift decisions and sharper steel. Those who faltered in their allegiance were cast out or imprisoned. Camelot, once a shining beacon of brotherhood, trembled beneath the weight of this internal storm. The queen, torn between remorse and resolve, steeled herself against the rising tide, while Lancelot, haunted by his own failings, rallied the knights who remained true, seeking to shield the realm from the ruin that crept ever closer. Messages carried swiftly on winged horses bore grim tidings back to Arthur. The war at home was no longer of foreign foes, but of kin turned adversary. Yet even as the kingdom fractured, Arthur's heart clenched at the knowledge that his son had become the spearhead of his realm's undoing. The stage was set for the bitterest of reckonings, where blood would be shed not for glory but for survival, where friendship and family would clash beneath Camelot's fading banners, and where a once bright kingdom would face its darkest hour yet. The wind carried a chill that morning, sharper than any before it, as though the very air itself sensed that the tide of ages was turning. From the distant horizon, where the hills met the sky in a cold line of steel, came the thunder of hooves and the crackle of banners, Arthur's returning host. Cloaked in the twilight of years and battle, the once youthful king approached Camelot, not with boast or triumph, but with the solemn weight of a man bearing the burden of fate. His eyes, deep pools of history and resolve, scanned the lands where his realm had blossomed and now fractured like splintered glass. The stones of Camelot stood silent witnesses to a kingdom torn between blood and loyalty. The shadow of Mordred, entrenched and fierce, loomed over all. The air thrummed with the tension of countless unsaid words, and the bitter truth that kingship could not mend every rupture in the heart. Riders met on the plain of Camlan, the field crimsoned long before battle's first cry. The two armies faced each other beneath a sky thick with clouds, the sun a dim smudge behind gathering storm. Arthur rode forward, clad in the gleaming mail that had first held young Hope, bearing Excalibur, its blade glittering with that ancient unyielding light. Behind him, his loyal knights formed an unbroken circle, faces grim yet steadfast. Across the morrow stand the forces of Mordred, fierce and numerous, eyes burning not merely with ambition but with resentment long nurtured in bitterness's dark shade. The clash began with the clash of voices, answers shouted across the field, the unsparing language of war. Steel rang against steel with deafening fury, the ground churned beneath the pounding feet of horses, and the sky wept cold rain, as if mourning what was to unfold. Amid the thunder of combat, Arthur found himself face to face with Mordred, the boy who had grown into a man of shadows and cunning, whose goals had shattered the peace Arthur had forged with such care. There was a flash in Mordred's eyes, a mixture of hatred and desperate hope, as if the crown itself could heal wounds too deep to see. Their swords met in a tempest of sparks and breathless fury, a dance older than kingdoms. Blow fell against blow, each strike born of hope and betrayal, honour and ruin entwined. Around them the battle roared, but in this moment all else fell away. Two destinies intertwined, inching ever closer to their end. With a cruel twist of fate, Arthur's shield shattered beneath a savage thrust. The cruel point of Mordred's blade drove through the king's side, searing pain spreading like wildfire beneath his armour. Arthur faltered, breath ragged, but summoned all his strength and answered with a blow that felled his foe, the life ebbing from Mordred's eyes as his body crumpled to the blood-soaked earth. The battle quieted as the news spread like a mournful chill. Mordred was dead, but so was the light in Arthur's own gaze. Mortally wounded, the king sank to one knee beneath the darkening sky. His knights gathered, faces stricken with grief and disbelief, Camelot's greatest hope now laying claim to a shadowed fate. As the storm above them broke, rain mingling with the blood and tears upon the battlefield, Arthur drew Excalibur close, whispering a farewell to the kingdom he had loved beyond all.
Tell them, peace is worth this cost.
Then came the silence, the heavy stillness of an end and a beginning intertwined. The rain had soaked the bloodied earth, turning the battlefield to muddy sorrow beneath the dimming sky. Arthur's breath came shallow and uneven, the great sword Excalibur heavy in his grasp, glinting faintly with the promise of all that had been fought for. Loyal knights gathered around him, faces etched with sorrow and solemn reverence. With effort, Arthur signalled the charge he would leave behind. The sword was not to remain with him, but must be returned to its source. Sir Bedivere, young and steadfast, knelt to receive the command, the weight of both the blade and its meaning pressing upon him. The journey to the lake was slow and mournful, leaves dripping with fresh rain as the small company moved through the quiet woods. At the water's edge, the still surface mirrored a grey sky heavy with unshed tears. Sir Bedivere struggled with his task, unable to cast away the symbol of hope and kingship entrusted to him. Twice he faltered, the sword's gleam too precious to relinquish. But Arthur's unwavering gaze and silent command bore down on him, compelling obedience. At last the blade flew through the air, spinning like a falling star before vanishing beneath the lake's mirror. The surface stilled for a heartbeat. Then an arm clad in shimmering silks rose suddenly from the depths. The Lady of the Lake reclaimed the sword, her touch both gentle and resolute, bearing the promise of return and the enduring bond between king and realm. Arthur, pale and weakening, was aided to the waiting boat, its oars resting silently on black water. The mist curled around the vessel as it slipped from the shore, carrying him toward the mysterious Isle of Avalon, the place of healing or eternal rest. His form leaned back against the gentle sway, eyes fixed on the fading horizon, a solitary king suspended between life and legend. The promise that he would return in the realm's hour of greatest need lingered like a breath across the water. Thus ended the mortal chapter of Arthur's tale, yet his legacy continued, woven into the very soul of the land and the hearts of those who await the once and future king. Time passed over Britain like a slow-moving tide, softening the scars of war and washing clean the blood-streaked fields of Camlan. Ruins faded under moss and new grass. The stones of Camelot, once thunderous with feast and council, settled into deep slumber, half remembered by the generations that followed. Yet, though the king and his court had vanished into mist, their story rooted itself resiliently in the heart of the land. At hearths and crossroads, beneath the beamed shadows of winter halls and the bright dazzle of maypole mornings, the memory of Arthur kindled the imaginations of all who gathered to listen. Old men tapped their pipes and told wide-eyed children of the king who had once drawn a sword from unyielding stone, of a kingdom knit together not only by force, but by the gentler binding of justice and promise. Mothers recounted tales to lull their young to sleep, of the round table where the bravest of knights had vowed to protect the weak, of quests through wild forests in pursuit of wonder, and of a queen's grace and sorrow shadowing a court of dazzling light. Even as the world changed, old gods yielding to new, and villages swelling into cities, Arthur's legend endured, each telling burnished by longing and hope. Through the centuries his story wove itself into tapestry and song, carved in capitals on crumbling abbeys, and sung in fields where wheat swayed under blue sky. He became the king who would not die, whose wounds might yet heal beneath the apple trees of Avalon. Poets named him the once and future king, and prophets murmured that in Britain's darkest hour, when hearts turned cold and hope seemed lost, Arthur would awaken and ride again, Excalibur flashing beneath a banner bright as morning. Fathers invoked his name to inspire courage. Scribes entered it in their chronicles as a talisman against encroaching shadow, and each new age claimed the legend for itself, a mirror in which the best of human longing and frailty might be glimpsed. So the man who had lived and bled and erred became more than memory. He became the spark at the centre of Britain's dream, the measure of a hope undaunted, the quiet, shining promise that justice and honour could rise anew from disaster's ashes. And as long as fires are kindled against the night, as long as the world aches for wisdom and a healer king, the tale of Arthur will flutter and rise, enduring in tales, in prayers, in the silent faith of the weary, awaiting the return of the once and future king.